Okay, second part of the viewport system. So we talked earlier, and using paint I illustrated how we could set up the viewports with these margins. So we've implemented that in a new class we created called views, and that's what all this data is. Let me just put a few blank lines in here to split some of this up so it's more readable. Okay, so that's set all these up. Now let's write the code that's going to create the viewports. Okay, right, so we're going to create a subroutine, public static void, and we're going to call it create ports, and we're going to ask whoever runs this subroutine to supply us with the number of players. Okay, so that's my skeleton for my subroutine. Remember we talked about skeletons, just like an outline. Right, the first thing we're going to want to do is make sure we get rid of any existing viewports. Okay, so we're going to say to the engine manager, your viewport system, get rid of them all. Okay, and we're also going to set at least the full screen viewport. So whether we've got one player playing on one screen or not, we at least need a viewport, otherwise nothing will be displayed. So we're going to say add full screen, because that's what we called it. That was that one there, a viewport that covers the entire screen. Okay, right. We're only going to want to show the viewports if a level doesn't fit in the screen. Okay, so if it does, so let's do a test here. So we can say gm.screenSize contains assets, not that, assets dot active level dot dimensions. So we're saying, does this rectangle that comprises the size of the level, which is what dimensions is, does it fit, or is it the same size as the screen? And if it is, we're gonna set our view associations. Okay. Now, what we have to do, by default there is one full screen viewport, and all the sprite layers, all the text rendering, all the tile maps are associated with that viewport, which means they get displayed. If a tile map isn't associated with that viewport, it will not be drawn. Okay, so we have to make sure that if we're only using one viewport, we associate our tile map, it's in the render properties, view associations, with that viewport, and we do it like that because you can be associated with more than one, so it's an array of viewport numbers. Oops. Okay, and we need to tell the engine what viewports we're rendering with as well. So, like I said, viewport's quite complicated. You wouldn't believe how nasty the code is. So gm.activePlayerViews equals new int naught. Okay. So that sets up just for a basic full screen single viewport. Okay, so that's important. So that's this mechanical thing. Don't worry too much about all the syntax of this. Right, and when we've done, we need to set up our sprite layers to use this viewport as well. So we're going to say, after the if, gm.engineManager.render properties of sprite, render layer sprite 0 view association equals whatever the active level is set to. Okay, so whatever we've set here for the tile map, the background, we're going to set the same for the sprites. Okay, so we're going to say assets.activeLevel.renderProperties.view association. Okay, so saying what's good enough for you is good enough for me. Bit of a long line. Okay. Right, so that takes care of the simple case where we just need one viewport. Now what we've got to do is handle it if it doesn't fit on the screen. So we're going to say else. So this code happens regardless. If you have got dust sprites which are on a different layer, just add the same thing for sprite 1 or whatever layer it was on. Okay, let's quick look at the particle system. If you did the dust, we put it on sprite 1. Okay. Similarly with the scaling, on the level data, scroll down. Where we set the scaling for sprite 0, we should set it for sprite 1 as well. Okay, so just a matter of, it doesn't matter if you haven't got a sprite 1, it won't break. So you could just set that, and that'll make sure that your smoke effects get drawn properly. Okay, back to the views. Right, I want to work out how many players we've got. So if we've got 2 players, we're going to use these split screen views here, which we've called split 2 and made a list of. If we've got 3 players, we want to use these viewports in addition to the main one, and if we've got 4, we want to use those. Okay, so we can do this in a switch. So we can say switch players, because we've been given the number of players. We can say if it's 2 players, we're going to say gm.enginemanager.viewport add range, which allows us to add an array, which is why we set those arrays up, and we do that. Okay. What we then need to do is the same thing again. We need to set up what view associations to what do we want to render our active level into. So we want to say view association equals, now this time we don't want to render it to viewport 0 because that's the full screen. We don't want to show it full screen, we want to show it in these viewports. So we want to show it in viewports 1 and 2, the ones that the players are in. Okay. We then need to tell the engine manager what are the active player views, and these are new int, and in brackets we're going to put, well, player 1's window, player 2's window, and the full view, but it'll draw that last. So that'll make all the text, so like the scores and things, be drawn last. Okay, we then need to put break. Okay, we need to make sure we put a break on there. Right, so that handles if we've got 2 players. Now the code's going to be pretty much the same for the other 3 and 4 players, so I'm just going to copy it for 3 and change the 2 to 3. Now we're going to use split 3. That's going to be the range of viewports, and that's going to be viewports 1, 2 and 3, and we want to render player 1's view, player 2's view, player 3's view, oops, and then the full screen view. Okay, I'm going to copy that again for 4 players, change the 3 to a 4, so that's going to be add the 4 viewports there for split 4. Say that we want to associate the level with 1, 2, 3 and 4, so it's going to be drawn 4 times, and tell the engine that the active views are windows 1, 2, 3, 4 and the overall full screen one. So that's really the render order of the views. Now we shouldn't have to do much else. That should be it. Okay, so we create a full screen view. If we can show the whole level on screen, we do this. We just say, right, use just that full screen. Otherwise, we look at how many players we've got and we use the set of viewports that we've set up. And then finally, wherever the active level is being drawn to, we set the sprite layer 0 and sprite layer 1, in case we've used that layer, to use the same views. Okay. Right, all we need to now do is run this code, this create ports, when we've drawn the level. Okay, so if we go back to play game and we look for show level, so use the picker, at the end when we've set the players up, all we've got to say is views.create ports and tell it how many players, so that's player count. Okay, and that should magically just work. What we need to do is turn the scaling off first, so we're going to go to level data, scroll up, and we're going to set scaling to false, scale large levels to false. Okay, we can turn that back on, we'll have a look at that in a sec. So let's just run this. So there's our normal level. Let me just move that up a little bit. Press F2, get our other normal level. Then we got our large level. And we've got 2 players on. And you can see what it's done. It's gone split screen. And you notice that Fragger is drawn over the whole screen because that was on the HUD layer. And we haven't altered the render view for the HUD layer. That's drawing to viewport 0. Okay. If I press F1 to add more players, you can see that we've split the screen into 3/4 and left another one blank. And if we press F1 again to put 4 players on, it splits into 4. Now the problem we've got is they're all showing the top left hand corner. So we need to do a little bit more code just to center each viewport around a particular player. Okay. Let's before we do that, let me just show you the effect of making it scale at the same time. So if we change that back to true, our scale large levels, we can draw viewports and scale at the same time. So you might want to do this so that you get to see a little bit more around your tank. Just run it again. Right, so press F2 to get to my level, and you can see that what it's done, it's shrunk the level down and split it into viewports. Okay. It's up to you whether that's what you want to do, and you can see that if I start the game, I'm controlling the red tank and it's been drawn all those different times. If I shoot, so I'm actually drawing all the sprites, so that's obviously split screen games slow things down because you're drawing everything twice. But let's get the centering working. I'm going to turn the scaling back off, so I'm going to set that back to false. Right. If we look at our general logic, we're going to need to reposition all the views every time we redraw the screen. Okay. So what we're going to do in our logic, if we look at game loop in general logic, we've got something for when we're running the game. So when we're in the game state fragging, we've got this frag logic. So if we right click on frag logic and say go to definition, we'll see that all we do at the minute is we put the scores up. So what we're going to do is we're going to create a subroutine that after we've drawn the scores, we're going to say center the viewports. Okay. This doesn't exist yet, so we're going to right click on that and say generate method stub. So it'll create it for us. Right. We only need to try and center the viewports when we've actually got more than one. Okay, so if we just do a check first, so we say to the engine, say, how many viewports have we got? So what's our count? If it's greater than 1, then we're going to have a go at doing this centering business. And we need to do this for each player. Okay, so we're going to create a little loop, and we're going to say, no, I is less than player, current players dot count I plus plus. So that's just going to do a loop for the number of players we've got. Okay, right. The first thing we need to do is worry about which viewport. So we need the viewport number. Now, if we go back to views quickly, we can see that the viewport numbers that are associated with the players are going to be 1, 2, and if there's 3 players, 1, 2, and 3. Oops. If there's 4, it's going to be 1, 2, 3, and 4. So the first player's viewport is 1. Now, in our, let's go back to general logic. In our loop, our first player is at position 0. So to get 1 from 0, we need to add 1. So we're going to do this. We're going to say player view PV equals from the engine viewport I plus 1. So when we're looking at player 0, which is the first player, we get the player's viewport by adding 1 to the value of this loop variable. Okay, and then the actual centering code is ridiculously simple. We just do this. I'll put it in. So we're going to say PV dot X equals, right, what is it, current players I. So the player we're looking at, that player's tank, the center of it, and the X value of that center, minus half the width of the viewport. So we say PV.width divided by 2. And what that does is it puts us in the center of that viewport. So it moves the viewport to the center. Okay? And we're going to do exactly the same with the Y value. So we say current players I dot tank dot center dot Y minus PV dot height div 2. Okay, so while the game's playing, we just keep doing this. So we move the viewport around so that it's moved to the tank but then moved across, so it'll always be to the left of the player and above the player. Okay, now we're doing that when we play the game, but we also ought to do it when we set up our title. So if we go to play game, when we draw the level after we've created our players, we should do center viewport. So if you just say center, what did I call it? Center viewports. Center view. I've done something silly here. Hang on. Right. I think it's because it's not static, so I can't access it. So if we just go back to general logic and say private static void center viewports. Okay. Back to play game, and magically it should be available. So center viewports. There we go. Okay, right, theoretically that's all we need to do. So we've got this little bit of code that says set the view for each player, their particular view 1. So let's put 1 up is view, let's make it a comment, is view 1, 2 up is view 2, etc. So it's I plus 1. Okay, so just a little comment to ourselves to do that. Another comment here, so it's like only do if more than one viewport. Right, so let's run it, see if it works. So when we go onto the multi-screen, we should see each of the tanks. So F2, F2, play the game, do F1, oh, something's bugged up. Right, we got a problem, let's have a look. So, as I add players, I'm getting this. Index out of range, because I've got a different number of viewports, so I've done something stupid. So the only thing I've done that I've changed was the viewport code. So I've got this, that shouldn't cause any problem. Let's have a look at play game. So I added this, so center viewports and correct. What I've done is really stupid. I've tried to center the viewports before we've created them. So I need to swap the order of that. So I create the viewports and then center. So let's run it again and see if that did fix it. So the order does matter. The order in which you do things, even though that's the simplest thing, sequence. Right, so if we do F2 to change the levels, you can see we've got 2 tanks and this time we can see the yellow tank. So let's add another player. There's the green tank, there's the blue tank. Okay, and if we start the game, I'm going to drive around with my blue tank, and you'll see my blue tank driving around shooting. You see I've ended up in the yellow tank's window. I'm going to drive across to the green tank. Keep your eyes on the blue player window. Go down a bit. Green one's down here somewhere. Going to be coming above. Okay, and that's you don't do anything to that viewport code now. It just works.